Don't take this as some half-assed sort of YouTuber apology. I was unaware of the context in this video, specifically in a clip that I used in which a guy rips a doorbell off of a wall. You probably know what video I'm talking about. It has become extremely popular. Well, I recently learned that the person was having a psychotic break. And here's the thing, right? You can watch any of my previous videos, and especially my video about homelessness. I make it very, very clear that you should not exploit people who are down on their knees already. You shouldn't do that. And I'm above doing that. And so that's why I decided to re-upload this video. I don't want to make fun of people with mental illnesses, and the fact that I did that unintentionally, without knowing the actual context behind that clip, it sucks. And I want to extend an apology out for the individual in that video, and I want to extend an apology out for anyone who may or may not have been harmed by this. Just know that there is help out there if you do need some type of mental health help. Sorry, I'm doing this completely unscripted. But yeah, I just wanted to apologize for that before getting on to the other preamble at the beginning of this video. This is going to be a bit of a lengthy pre-intro segment, so if you want to skip right into the rest of this video, then feel free to skip to the timestamp on screen. This is mostly to clarify something that I said in my previous video about Nvidia, as well as contextualize this video just a little bit. Now, the thing that I want to clarify about my previous video is that I am no longer an endorser of Threat Interactive. While I have mentioned that I do agree with some things that he's said, especially his hatred for Digital Foundry and some of his earlier videos displaying some of the unoptimized or under-optimized features in games, I have to mention, being a person who references anything that Grumps says in any facet that isn't let's all point and laugh, calls into question his intelligence and knowledge on multiple different subjects. Also, I have become aware of the fact that he weaponizes DMCA claims in order to silence criticism, which, to me, is extremely unethical, abhorrent, and is against the law. This is just a generally shitty thing to do. So while I might have referenced Threat Interactive in my previous video, I am willing to admit that I got owned. I got completely owned. I was unaware of what kind of a person Threat Interactive actually was. I thought he was mostly just a person who was really interested in GPU architecture and game optimization. Not that he was this massive fraud that was waving around DMCA claims in order to shut down criticism, and also kind of a bit of a chud, actually. So, like I said, I'm willing to admit that I really don't like this person anymore, and that he kind of seems like a massive fraud, and that was my mistake for taking what he said at face value. Secondly, throughout this video, I don't want to give off the impression that I actually like Cox, or the Supreme Court, or basically any entity that I mentioned throughout this video. The Supreme Court, especially Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, are absolutely fucking embarrassing 99% of the time, and are extremely partisan and have no room dictating what is and isn't unconstitutional. And Cox is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, and just because they were forced into a good position does not automatically mean that they are the arbiter for morality. For reference, Cox is not just an ISP and communications company, but they are also a huge automotive company as well. It's probably the closest thing the United States has to an actual Zaibatsu. And now that I've gotten all that out of the way, I think it's actually time for me to start this video. Alright everyone, today is a big day. Oh boy, I'm so excited. As a bisexual male who really loves talking about technology, today we talk about one of my favorite subjects. Today, we're talking about Cox.
Techmo That is not a thing we should be talking about on YouTube. This could get us in serious trouble. Please keep this kind of talk to the hub.
What? No, what the fuck? No! What? Ew! That's the thing that I gave the viewers' mothers and fathers last night. Alright, I get it. Yeah, that wasn't funny. Alright, I'm sorry. Fuck you. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Cox. C-O-X, the internet service provider, media company, and automotive company, I guess. Oh, geez, I really have to look into this company at some point. Alright, for some context, and I guess to be fair, this is some pretty old news, but between December 1st of 2025 and March 25th of 2026, Cox has been sued by Sony Music Entertainment. Now, I won't go through the entire legal document here because, one, I'm not a lawyer, and therefore, I do not understand the language of legalese, and two, this would take a long while for me to go through since it is a 27-page document. Now, in a nutshell, Sony was arguing that Cox and other internet service providers would have to go out of their way to terminate internet access for those who were pirating, and especially if it managed to hurt the bottom lines of record labels. Now, something that I should ask, and something that everyone should ask, is what does Sony think piracy is? Because piracy could technically be extrapolated to songs that are archived, and if you really wanted to be a pedant, you could argue that listening to a song that was unauthorized on YouTube is technically a form of piracy. After all, the artist and the music label didn't consent to you listening to their music through that website unless they were the ones who uploaded it through an official channel. It's the same reason why videos on Discord or on other websites that have copywritten music may or may not embed depending on what the actual copyright holder's stance is on that song. So, for example, if your friend has ever sent you a video on Discord, like a meme, right? If your friend has ever sent you a meme on Discord and it had copywritten music, but you couldn't view it because of UMG or some shit, that's essentially the form of piracy that I'm talking about. Or rather, in quotes, piracy, because even I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Now, silly arguments aside, Sony is obviously targeting things like downloads and torrents. Now, I think it should be obvious that Corporation A should not be able to force Corporation B to do its bidding just because there are people who are customers of Corporation B that are doing things that Corporation A doesn't like. Again, it's silly to assume that's how the world works. Allow me to pose a hypothetical. Now, let's say that you and I are driving on the road. I'm driving a Suzuki Hayabusa, and you're driving a Ford Fiesta. Now, you end up crashing into me, so I decide to sue because of the amount of damage that was done to me and my motorcycle. So again, I sued you. And then I tried to get Suzuki involved to sue Ford because of the Ford Fiesta that did damage to a piece of Suzuki manufactured hardware. If you think that sounds insanely stupid, that's because it is. And that's because that is essentially what Sony is arguing. Sony is arguing that because somebody did something that it sees as malicious, it should then go after the platform that is providing a service that isn't intended to be used to do malicious things by a person doing a malicious thing. And again, I'm not saying that I think piracy is malicious, not even fucking close. I'm just talking about how Sony and Cox would view this. Now where have I heard that before? Where have I heard something like this before, but on a much broader scale, and mostly from people who are absolutely ancient and don't understand anything about the internet or any types of laws regarding online free speech? I feel like it's something that's extremely fundamental that you can't touch. I feel like instead of copyright being the issue, the, in quotes, issue was protecting children online. A sort of section, I think it was 230. Listen, maybe that's what it was. I don't know I don't know. I don't know what it is that I'm thinking of, but I'm sure it'll come back to me later, so oh well for now.
Something worth noting is that you pirating a game, piece of software, movie, or song is not even close to being as morally reprehensible as a company like OpenAI deliberately going out of its way to use something like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to get around paywalls that the New York Times specifically started putting in place to combat LLMs and AI companies from using their articles for training against the consent of journalists and companies. To put it short and sweet, if the Supreme Court, Sony or any other record label gave us a flying fuck about piracy, then they would all start suing companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Facebook, Nvidia, Microsoft, and many, many more.
There is a massive chunk of hypocrisy at play here that I would like to point out. I have a feeling that the government only really looked at this ruling because there was a genuine vested interest at one point by the Supreme Court to actually take the side of Sony in order to start regulating people's free speech. Listen, the United States just operates like that all the time, and honestly, there's historical precedent for this. The only reason I really even say that is because for basically the entirety of the 21st century, the internet and technology have been at the forefront of these weird bullshit culture wars and moral panics. There is a lot of historical precedent in regards to the courts and piracy. Do the names LimeWire and Napster ring a bell to you? The other chunk of hypocrisy that I have to ask about involves something exponentially more serious and something that has way more consequences than a group of pirates engaging in piracy. Let me ask you something, because my country, the good old US of A, gets dunked on and memed on a lot because of our standards for gun control. Now let me make something very, very clear. I am a person who is pro-Second Amendment in terms of ideals and concepts. The thing is that whenever it's actually warranted to proclaim the rights of 2A, somehow people just tuck tail and act like it doesn't exist, or they are perfectly complicit in such activity. This is a foundational principle that our country was founded upon. Essentially, the government cannot take away your right to bear arms or formulate a well-regulated militia.
Techmo, this is a video about internet service providers, media corporations, the law, and piracy. Why are you talking about United States firearm regulation and legislature?
Because there is an underlying point to all of this that I'm trying to get at. The underlying point is that despite it only being April, the United States has had 97 shootings, and mass shootings specifically. And God knows how many one-on-one incidents or unreported shootings. Do you see firearms manufacturers being sued over something exponentially worse than piracy? Really think about it. And yes, believe it or not, Sony, I'm talking to you. Murder is worse than piracy. Get that through your head. I don't see anything being done about firearms manufacturers and mass violence in America. But when it comes to piracy, no, we need to be tough on crime, which is why we're going to take Cox to the Supreme Court as opposed to trying to rein in firearms manufacturers for acts of murder committed by other people. And again, I'm not even talking about from a standpoint of my own personal beliefs. Again, I am pro-Second Amendment. But I really think that we need to sit down and consider on a moral and pragmatic scale which one makes more sense to go after if we use this same line of argumentation that Sony is trying to place when it's talking about Cox. Or what about things like the gambling industry? Or things like Ozempic and opium, and Big Pharma's relationship to both of those, essentially creating a billion fucking addicts by preying on people's psychological, emotional, and physical state, or whether or not they have some type of underlying trauma. I'm just saying, if you were to use basic logic and reasoning, there are plenty of things that do exponentially more harm than piracy. But again, oh no, piracy is this big ol' scary thing, and it's against the law, and therefore, The courts need to decide immediately what should be done about this. For some reason, something like piracy is taken more seriously than something like a cigarette company putting hundreds of carcinogens and some of the most addictive substances into their products, when in actuality, a cigarette should just be a piece of paper, some dried tobacco leaves, and maybe a couple of extra ingredients in there for taste. But no, once again, piracy is this weird societal level crime that I'm supposed to, for some reason, give a fuck about. I don't give an underlying shit if Ubisoft gets as much money as they do or not. Think about it. You wouldn't download a car, right? Like, you wouldn't do that. Well, no, actually, fuck you. Maybe I do want to download Forza using BitTorrent and some random magnet link that some dickhead online uploaded onto some random mega thread in a forum 5 years ago because I'm broke as shit in this economy. Now, make no mistake here, I am not saying that Cox is going out of its way to do this through the kindness of their own heart. A desire to see a better world, if you will. Cox is doing this because Sony is a very powerful company. Cox isn't able to do that level of moderation for every single user of their service, and in all honesty, that would really cut into Cox's bottom line. Not only that, but you have to take into consideration the absolute logistical nightmare that would be involved in it. Imagine if you are a person who owned a diner who had a zero tolerance policy on weed, so what you end up doing is spending all of the money and resources that you have into purchasing one Ring camera per inch to make sure that your employees and customers are not smoking the devil's lettuce. The spicy shrubberoo. If you put more than 3 seconds of thought into this, you would understand that this is astronomically ridiculous, and it is also astronomically ridiculous to know how greedy, arrogant, and entitled companies like Sony Music are. So yeah, I can see why Cox, from a financial and practical standpoint, would rather go to court as opposed to pursue some insane giga surveillance initiative just to clamp down on behavior that one company so far disapproves of, at least vocally disapproves of. And again, honestly, I don't like Cox, or basically any major corporate American ISP. I think we should give credit where credit is due on this one, though, and say that Cox was being unintentionally based on this front and managed to stumble into the correct position just because Sony is extremely demanding, overzealous, and is just a company that thinks it can do whatever the fuck it wants and throw around lawsuits, and thinks that it should just be able to exert their power and police other platforms because other people are doing things that Sony does not like. The only reason I'm giving Cox any credit is because what Cox essentially did was allow other ISPs to not be forced into the exact same position that they were in. Cox basically allowed other ISPs to not be forced into being both internet service providers and the police at the same time. I think it would truly be dystopian if Sony won this lawsuit. Imagine a world in which you and other people on your network had gotten shut down because of one incident that a company didn't like by proxy. Keep in mind, with companies like Sony, if you give them an inch, they will take a fucking mile. What if Sony didn't like you contributing to the Internet Archive, and your ISP had to hammer down on that because of Sony? What if Sony didn't like the fact that you weren't using a new music streaming platform that they had developed and decided to try to go after you using your ISP to listen to Pandora instead of Spotify? Internet service providers are not the cops, and they should not be forced into acting like the cops. I think anyone should understand this. Truly, truly dystopian levels of thinking here. And I'm not even getting into what other people and lobbyists within Sony and Congress probably think about something like this. But again, Because of Cox stumbling into a good position, and because the United States Supreme Court decided to get their thumbs out of their asses for 3 seconds and not go after trans people in sports, information, art, and culture can be free and preserved once again. Xfinity, CenturyLink, and Cox will not have to police their platforms and cater to the whims of other massive corporations. The only institution that will be able to force these platforms to do any form of policing is the federal government, and honestly, I don't trust them to do that. But again, this is a great victory for we the people online. Before I end this video, I want to say thank you to everyone who watches my content, supports me, and supports my friends. This channel would truly be nothing without you, and I really do mean you. I want to start talking about more good news in tech as well, so while there is a lot of stuff that I could harshly criticize in regards to modern tech and how modern tech is being used, I should also point out whenever good things happen too, because a better, brighter world is always possible, even if it doesn't look like it is. And I guess on a similar note, I want to mention another thing. I plan on moving away from Adobe Premiere and Adobe Media Encoders soon due to quality assurance reasons, and the fact that I really just do not like Adobe. Now look, I have a legal don't fucking sue Xfinity, Adobe copy of Creative Suite 6. The reason for the migration is simple. I actually can't tell how much of the quality issues with my videos are related to Adobe software being shit or Google's video compression system somehow fucking with the video quality. And besides, I think it might be wise to try to do away with Adobe while I'm at home, as opposed to while I'm at work. In the future, I plan on making a video talking about Adobe alternatives and how you can step away from Adobe. And for the record, this is the first video that I have recorded and edited using a program known as Olive, which is still in alpha. Hopefully this video turns out good. Hopefully. But again, in the future, I plan on making a video talking about Adobe alternatives and how you can step away from Adobe too. Remember, we're all in this together. Thanks for watching, and remember to support the people that have been on screen this whole time. This has been Techmo Snowspark signing off. Peace.